Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that tries to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the story shaping our world. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something incredibly recent and deeply tragic. It's really sent shockwaves across the globe. We're talking about the Air India flight AI-171 disaster. It happened just June 12, 2025, involved a Boeing 7878 Dreamliner. Our mission really is to unpack the information we have, move past the initial headlines, and give you a solid understanding of what happened, the aftermath, and crucially, the questions that are still hanging in the air.
Exactly. And with an event like this, you just get flooded with information, right?
Yeah.
It can be overwhelming. So our goal here is to give you that context, help connect the dots between all these different bits of information so you understand not just the facts, but, well, what they actually mean, the bigger picture for aviation.
Okay, let's start right there with those catastrophic moments on June 12th. So Flight AI-171, registration VTANB, it leaves Ahmedabad around 1:38 p.m. local time, heading for London Gatwick. Now picture this. Just seconds after getting airborne, maybe 625 feet up, the aircraft just loses stability. It stalled, which for anyone listening means the wings basically lost their lift. The plane couldn't sustain flight. It descended uncontrollably and then crashed into a hostile building at BJ Medical College in the Magani Nagar area. It just erupted into flames almost instantly.
It's just horrific to imagine.
And the scale of it, this is where it just becomes gut-wrenching. 242 people on the plane, 230 passengers, 12 crew, and staggeringly, 241 of them perished. But the tragedy didn't end there. At least 38 other people on the ground in that hostel were also killed. It's an almost unimaginable loss.
It really is. And, amidst all that devastation, there's this one small, almost unbelievable detail, a single survivor from the aircraft. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, a British Indian national. He apparently managed to escape through an emergency exit. He's recovering now, just miraculous, really.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting for the investigation is how quickly some early details started to surface. There's CCTV footage from the runway, apparently showing the aircraft's very brief, unstable flight path. And investigators also noted something intriguing early on, evidence of what they're calling a rapid acceleration test, or RAT, just before the crash.
Hold on, a rapid acceleration test. That sounds technical. Can you break that down? Why is that specific detail catching investigators' eyes right away?
Yeah, good question. It is technical, and it's potentially a very significant clue. So a rapid acceleration test is usually a maintenance procedure, something done very deliberately, typically on the ground. You basically spool up the engines really quickly to test their response, check other systems. Seeing signs of something like that happening just before a crash, especially right after takeoff, that's highly unusual.
Okay, so what might that imply?
Well, it immediately points investigators down certain paths. Was it maybe a desperate attempt by the pilots to regain power or stability? Could it indicate some kind of system malfunction, maybe an engine issue, or even an unexpected automatic activation? It's a key piece because it helps frame the question, was this primarily mechanical? Was it a software glitch? Or was it related to pilot actions in those final critical seconds? And they also noted early on that the landing gear seemed to still be deployed. Again, unusual if the plane had achieved stable flight. These details, they're like the first breadcrumbs for the investigation.
Wow, okay. That survivor, Vishwash Kumar Ramesh. Yeah, sheer luck, maybe quick thinking, as you said. Let's shift focus a bit, though, to the human toll, the victims. Most were Indian nationals, obviously, but this tragedy really underscores how connected the world is through air travel. We know there were 53 British citizens, 7 Portuguese, 1 Canadian passenger among those lost. It touched many nations. And the process of identifying everyone, it's incredibly difficult, painstaking work, especially after such a severe impact and fire. They're using DNA testing. So far, I think the reports say 125 bodies have been identified, and 83 of those have been returned to their families. It's just a slow, heartbreaking process.
It truly is.
And amidst all the official response, there was this detail about the local residents, people living nearby, just rushing towards the scene to help, bravely. They recovered personal belongings from the wreckage later, things like gold items, passports, someone found a Bhagavad Gita, small things that just speak volumes about the lives cut short.
And that reaction from the local community, it really does make you pause, doesn't it? Rushing towards that kind of scene. It shows incredible bravery, incredible humanity. In the absolute worst moments, you see that kind of compassion emerge. And as you said, the identification process itself, it just highlights the deep personal tragedy behind every single number. It's families waiting for that final awful certainty so they can even begin to grieve.
So with an incident this huge, the investigation kicks off immediately, and it's a massive undertaking. Can you walk us through who's involved and what their key tools are?
Absolutely. And it really is a global effort, which is typical and necessary in aviation safety. India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AIIB, and the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the DGCA, they're leading the investigation. But they're getting significant help from Boeing, naturally, as the manufacturer, and also authorities from the UK and the US, given the flight's destination and, where aircraft components often originate.
Right, and the black boxes, we always hear about them. They found them, right?
Right.
Can you explain exactly why those are so critical?
Yes. Thankfully, both were recovered relatively quickly, and they're absolutely vital. People call them black boxes, but they're actually bright orange to make them easier to find in wreckage. There are two main ones. You've got the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR. That records everything said in the cockpit pilot conversations, alerts, clicks, engine sounds, everything. Then there's the flight data recorder, the FDR. That logs hundreds of different parameters from the aircraft itself: altitude, airspeed, engine thrust, control inputs, flap settings, you name it, second by second.
So together they give a complete picture.
Pretty much. They provide investigators with this incredibly detailed timeline of the aircraft's state and the crew's actions in those final minutes, even seconds. It's often the only way to truly piece together the sequence of events. But it's important to stress, right now, the exact cause. Still unconfirmed. They're looking at several possibilities, things like engine failure, maybe a bird strike hitting a critical component, or various kinds of pilot error or issues with procedures. It's complex.
And how long does something like this typically take? When might we get answers?
Well, the standard procedure is a preliminary report within about, say, 3 months. That gives the basic facts found so far. But the full comprehensive analysis, that can take much longer. Given the severity here, maybe over a year, potentially. There's just a huge amount of data from the recorders, from the wreckage, from maintenance logs, training records. It all needs to be meticulously pieced together and analyzed.
Makes sense. And in the immediate aftermath, safety becomes the absolute priority. What did India's aviation regulators, the DGCA, do right away?
They acted very swiftly, yes. The DGCA mandated enhanced safety inspections on all of Air India's Boeing 787s. That's a standard but crucial first step. You need to quickly assess if there might be a wider systemic issue affecting the entire fleet of that type within that airline.
And what did those checks mean for Air India's operations? And more importantly, what did they find? How should we, interpret those initial findings?
Operationally, there was an impact, yeah. As of June 17th, which was just a few days after the crash, reports said 66 Air India flights had been canceled because of these checks. Now, the findings, and this is a really key point for context, the initial word, is that while the checks did flag some maintenance lapses—
Lapses like what, generally?
things like maybe record keeping wasn't perfect, or perhaps certain minor checks weren't done exactly on schedule, procedural issues within the airline's maintenance routines, operational stuff. But, and this is the crucial distinction, they reportedly found no major fleet safety issues with the 787s themselves. So it wasn't pointing to a fundamental design flaw or a widespread technical problem across all the Dreamliners that would necessitate grounding the whole fleet, for instance.
Ah, okay. So it shifted the focus.
Exactly. Finding maintenance lapses tends to point the investigation more towards the airline's specific operational practices, training, and adherence to procedures, rather than the aircraft design itself. And following that, the DGCA did summon Air India officials. They requested detailed training records for the flight crew involved, the dispatchers, anyone connected operationally to that specific flight. So you can see the focus narrowing onto the human factors and the airline's internal processes, alongside the technical investigation of the aircraft wreckage.
Right. And beyond the regulators, there was a wider response too, wasn't there?
Yes, definitely. India's prime minister, other union ministers, they visited the crash site very quickly. They offered condolences, support, and also announced significant compensation around 1 crore rupees per passenger for the victims' families. And globally, too, there were messages of sympathy and support pouring in from countries like Denmark, the UK, many others.
It really touched a nerve internationally.
It did. And this incident raises a really important point about the Boeing 787 specifically, because this crash marks the first fatal hull loss for the 787 Dreamliner since it first entered service back in 2011.
First fatal hull loss. That sounds significant.
It is very significant. Yeah. A hull loss means the aircraft is damaged beyond any possibility of repair. It's essentially destroyed. And fatal means, tragically, that lives were lost on board. The 787 has had other incidents, technical issues, groundings early